Welcome again. This is fourth, if I recount correctly, fourth event, fourth Zoom meeting that the Galicia Jewish Museum is organizing in connection with the mobile application that we launched a couple of months ago. The application is called Photographs from Jewish Poland. You can find information about this application on our website, in our Facebook feed. Is an application in which every other day we are publishing one single photograph connected with the history of Jews in Poland and the presence of the Jews in Poland, adding some short texts and trying to achieve with time building an educational tool that will be one of the references, visual references for the Jewish history in Poland. And today we are very honored to host Ruth Ellen Gruber, award-winning journalist, writer. Ruth, some of you know Ruth. She's specializing in Jewish heritage in Europe, and she's running very well known and actually amazing website. If you want to be up to date with the newest developments in the Department of Jewish Heritage in Europe, the website is called Jewish Heritage Europe EU. And today Ruth will be giving a lecture which somehow maybe sums up her experience with Jewish heritage in Europe and Jewish culture in Europe and Jewish history in Europe over 4 decades now, because her first encounter with Poland was some time ago when she was a journalist covering the Solidarity movement here in Poland. This lecture, this meeting is a part of a larger project. As I said, it's co-financed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Republic of Poland through the competition Public Diplomacy New Dimensions 2020. And before I will leave the floor to Ruth, just some announcements. This is going to be recorded. This is recorded. It will be available later in a week or maybe a few days on our website and in our YouTube channel. At the very end of this lecture, there will be a very short 1-minute survey, which I encourage you to take. If you have any question, you can use chat option, and we will try to answer some of these questions at the end. Okay, thank you, Ruth, again for joining us, for agreeing to giving this lecture, and the floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Tomek. First of all, I'm really happy to be here with you and whoever else is here, because I can't see who's here. I also have to apologize. My dog is going crazy outside, so you may hear barking in the background. I'm going to amend what Tomek said, that while I will be summing up a lot of the work that I've done in Jewish heritage, I'm going to sort of go beyond that. I think I'll try to stay in Poland, but I'll go beyond the parameters of Jewish heritage and the virtually Jewish to go into other areas which I have found rather tangential to it, or related, or at least sort of having some commonalities with what I've been seeing and researching on the Jewish world. What I'm going to do is give a bit of an introduction, which, forgive me, I'll be reading. And then I'm just going to take a journey in photographs that date back actually, 30 or 40 years, some of them. They may not be the photographs that you're expecting to see, but I think they're interesting. So I hope you'll find something maybe different, but engaging in this conversation, because maybe we'll have time for conversation afterwards. And then I'm always available for conversation one-on-one with Zoom. It's really easy, and it'll be great to talk. So let me share the screen now, Tomek. Is that what I'm going to do? Yes. I'll share the screen if I can. Wait a second. Good. Though I'm known best for my work on Jewish heritage and the virtually Jewish ways that non-Jews interact with Jewish culture, I started off as a mainstream journalist. My experience in Poland dates back to 1980, when I was correspondent with the American news agency UPI, covering Solidarność and martial law. I was even jailed and expelled from the country because of my coverage. This is our office, our UPI office, when I was there back in the early 80s. You can see the top picture is me and two colleagues who were visiting from elsewhere. And then in the lower right, that's me helping transmit a photograph on this clunky old photographic transmission machine from a solidarity conference in Gdańsk. And then to the lower left, it's me and my cat, International Star, and Andrzej Gwiazda, who was one of the leaders of Solidarność. I was jailed and expelled from the country because of my coverage. And what happened was that there was this trumped up charge that I may have been receiving military photos from someone in Gdańsk, and they put me into jail overnight, and they interrogated me for 7 hours, and then they expelled me from the country the next day, and I was persona non grata in Poland until the end of communist rule. I'm not exactly sure exactly why I was the one that they did this to, but I think part of it has to do because I was a young woman. I was with a major, what was then a major American news agency. And I believe at the time I was the longest serving accredited American correspondent in Warsaw. But it could have had to do with this too. These pictures, those of you who are Polish will probably remember from your history books. They're iconic pictures from inside Białowieża prison of Solidarity leaders when they were in prison there. And they were taken with my camera. My tiny little Olympus camera was smuggled into the prison in a bag of sugar. And these photographs came out of it. So it may have had something to do with that. Throughout my career, I've observed how people create lived experience via dreams and desires. Whether it was Solidarność activists aiming for civil society, or emerging Jews and Jewish communities claiming, reclaiming, or creating identities, or fans of the American frontier finding identity in country music and homegrown swinging door saloons. Much of my writing in recent years has dealt with the notion of real imaginary. These are sights, experiences, and even mindsets evoked by the past or by another culture or by one's own personal heritage, which through study, enactment, yearnings, and even fantasies are transformed into something that is quite different, but often just as real as the original. They are imaginary, or at least reimagined, but at the same time real nonetheless in their own contemporary context. They exist as real physicalities, real experiences. What is meant or signified can be paramount. These notions are an outgrowth of my thoughts on what I've called the virtually Jewish world, an intense, visible, vivid Jewish presence in places where few Jews live today. This in turn was rooted in the concept of Jewish space as it was articulated in the mid-1990s by the historian Diana Pinto. At the time, Pinto used the term Jewish space to describe the place occupied by Jews, Jewish culture, and Jewish memory within mainstream European society, regardless of the size or activity or even existence of the local Jewish population. The Jewish thing is becoming universal, she stated at a conference on planning for the future of European Jewry in 1995. As a journalist, I documented Jewish heritage and I chronicled the revival and development of Jewish life in Poland. At the same time, I became fascinated by how, along with efforts to revive Jewish communal life and reclaim and reassert Jewish identity in post-Holocaust, post-communist countries, the Jewish space in Europe was often being filled by non-Jews. They documented synagogue buildings, Jewish cemeteries, and other abandoned Jewish heritage sites, and spearheaded restoration projects. They formed klezmer bands and opened Jewish museums. They used Jewish themes in artworks, theater performances, and literary compositions. They administered, taught, and studied in academic Jewish studies programs. They created the infrastructure for Jewish-themed tourism, opened Jewish-style cafes and restaurants, and more. It was this phenomenon, the non-Jewish filling of the Jewish space, that formed what I've referred to as a virtual Jewishness, or a virtual Jewish world, peopled by virtual Jews who create, perform, enact, or engage with Jewish culture from an outsider perspective, often in and often as a result of the absence of local Jewish populations. Over the years, these and related issues have inspired considerable debate that has encompassed discussions of issues ranging from whether an overarching Jewish space actually does exist in Europe, to a more narrow focus on what entails more clearly defined Jewish spaces and specific Jewish places, to what may or may not be regarded as actually Jewish amid constantly evolving local circumstances. New terminology has emerged as outside researchers, participant observers, philanthropic foundations, journalists, and yes, local Jews and non-Jews themselves examine and try to make sense out of shifting paradigms and generational and other changes. Diana Pinto's own work has continued to influence these discussions. In later writings, she described Jewish space as a cultural but also material space of encounter between Jews and non-Jews, an open cultural and even political agora where Jews intermingle with others as Jews and not just as citizens. It is a virtual space, present anywhere Jews and non-Jews interact on Jewish themes, she wrote, or where a Jewish voice can make itself felt. As part of the debates, the expression virtual has caught on far more and in more far-reaching ways than I ever anticipated. Some people use the term virtual as a pejorative or as a shorthand synonym for fake. Some have attributed to my own views a dismissive attitude towards non-Jewish engagement with or interest in Jewish culture, or see me as having somehow disparaged as inauthentic the people I have described as virtual Jews and their activities. In the Polish context, the Polish writer and Jewish activist Kosta Gebert, whom I've known for almost 40 years, and sociologist Helena Dotner have provided an apt description of my concept of virtually Jewish as, quote, a place where Jewish culture is no longer Jewish property, but rather an open field in which anybody can use the props and as they see fit. For me, Diana Pinto's original formulation of Jewish space remains the most powerful. It continues most strongly to influence my own thinking. The work of the late semiologist and author Umberto Eco has also been important, particularly his essay way back in 1975, Travels in Hyperreality, in which he wrote of times and places where, quote, absolute unreality is offered as real presence, and where, quote, the boundaries between game and illusion are blurred and falsehood is enjoyed in a situation of fullness. After Virtually Jewish was published nearly 20 years ago in 2002, I looked for another subject to study, and I decided on how Europeans view America. This was right after September 11th, and there were a lot of discussions going on at the time about anti-Americanism, philo-Americanism, and all of that. I narrowed it down. I had to narrow it down because the field was so big. And I focused specifically on what I call the imaginary Wild West in Europe. It's a colorful and multifaceted subculture of music, study, lifestyle, commercialism, entertainment, and reenactment that creates its own real imaginary spaces. The imaginary Wild West encompasses country music and Wild West festivals, commercial and privately run Wild West homesteads, ranches and theme parks, swinging door saloons, decorative conventions, frontier or Native American inspired lifestyles, cuisine choices, symbolic enactment, and other phenomena, including fine art and serious scholarship. Some of it all echoes some of what I've described as part of the virtually Jewish world. Enactment and reenactment, for example, the employment of stereotypes and literary imagery, the use of another culture to inform or create identities. Also entailed are the role, quest for, and questions about authenticity. Commercialism and cosplay can play a role too, and so can fun. And for some, involvement entails finding what could be called a homeland of the soul. There are major differences, of course, between the virtually Jewish phenomenon and the imaginary Wild West. One has to do with the real traumatic issue, coming to terms with the Holocaust and its legacy of guilt and loss. The other, one can say, is the embrace and elaboration of a fantasy and its translation into personal experience. But both have to do with identity. And in some cases, they both manifest an implicit spiritual, moral, or political message, especially given the history of Eastern Europe. Indeed, under communism, both the exaltation of the American West and the engagement with Jewish culture, history, and heritage had implicit, if often oblique, political meaning. Going into these spheres, being interested in them, was often an implicit way of showing dissidence, like passive dissidence or quiet dissidence against the regime. What I'm going to do now, I'll just leave these points, which were so important to me, up for a minute. And then I'm just going to take us through some of my adventures in these worlds that I've been talking about and which I find related and which sort of continue to circle around each other and which I continue to enjoy because, as I said, fun can have a lot to do with what this is all about. When I was a journalist in Poland, it was a time when there was little expectation that there would be a Jewish future in Eastern Europe. I myself didn't have much interest in the Jewish story, except that I was a Jew. And it was a time when all these books were being written. Most things that were being written were about last. We all know Chuck Fishman's book, which came out in the mid-70s, Polish Jews, The Final Chapter. There's Remnants, which came out about a decade later, The Last Jews of Poland. The Last Jews of Eastern Europe by Yale Strom. The Last Jews of Radouts, which is a town in Romania where my own grandparents came from, came out also in the mid-70s. But there was little hope or little expectation of a future in that part of the world. One of the books that was published after Solidarność, because in Poland, it was the success of Solidarność, which sort of opened the way to an honest and much more deep and broad discussion of Jewish issues. One of the first books that was published was Monika Krajewska's Time of Stones. And I've left this on the screen on its own because it and what's around it have been quite important in my own development as a writer, as a researcher, and as a journalist, in fact, and as a person, in fact. As I said, I didn't have really that much interest in the Jewish story, let's say, as a journalist. My story was Solidarność. My story was then martial law, which I was covering, but I was Jewish. And my introduction to the Jewish world in Poland came because I'm Jewish. I told this story recently when I had a conversation with Jonathan Ornstein, but what it was the eve of Yom Kippur. I think it was my last day in Warsaw, 1980, after I had been there. I was based in Belgrade then, and I would be traveling back and forth between Belgrade and Warsaw. And it was the eve of Yom Kippur. And even though I'm not religious, I decided I had to find, a synagogue or somewhere to go. But there wasn't any synagogue there in Warsaw. There was nothing. There was the Nożyk synagogue was still sort of an abandoned place, and there was no infrastructure or scarcely any infrastructure that I knew of. But I went and I found a group of more or less 20, 25, 30 people who were in a room near the Nożyk synagogue in that complex. It was a very shabby room. It was mainly elderly people. There were a couple of kids running around, little kids, toddlers, and they kept running around and making noise, and the older people were shushing them up. And I remember thinking, my first conscious thought about the Jewish future in Europe, I remember thinking, why are they shushing them up? They should be embracing this noise, embracing these young people. There were 3 or 4 people my own age, young, And it wasn't really a service. There was no rabbi. It was just people praying on their own. They came up to me and asked me who I was. And I said, well, I'm the UPI correspondent. I'm Jewish. It's Eve of Yom Kippur. So I came to find a synagogue. It's normal. And they came to me, and this is where this real imaginary comes in. They came to me and they say, no, you're a real Jew. Tell us what we should be doing. And I said, real Jew. I said, I don't keep kosher. I very rarely go to synagogue. I don't read Hebrew. No. You've known all your life that you're Jewish. Come home with us and tell us what we should be doing. And so I did. I went back. It was Staszek and Monika Krajewska and another woman, Risha Zachariash, who has since made Aliyah. And we went back to the tiny apartment that Staszek and Monika lived in. And we started talking, and 40 years later, we're still talking. And they are, what is the word of, what is real? When Staszek and Monika gave this talk through the Galicia Museum a couple of weeks ago, Staszek, they were telling how they used this American handbook to teach themselves, or they would look to people like me to learn from. They were part of the Jewish Flying University, or the Flying Jewish University, which I also became part of. And these were people, mainly young people like myself, who were teaching themselves everything about Jewish tradition, Jewish customs, Jewish life, and in some ways, even Jewish memories, because even the most secular person around can have these sort of ingrown memories from the grandmother, but people didn't have grandparents. And I remember going to a Seder, I guess it was 1981, to go to a Seder. I can't remember whose house it was, but whoever it was who was leading the Seder asked, has anybody at the table been to a Seder before? And I was the only one to raise my hand. So it was this total creation rather than a recreation. It was, as I said, creating out of these desires and dreams and with all the means possible. So that's how my start was with this Jewish world. And it took, another almost decade before I got back into it. And as I said, from January 1983, I was persona non grata in Poland, so I couldn't return. And I didn't want to have any contact with any of my friends in Warsaw because I didn't want to get them in trouble. It was a very difficult time. And once or twice, there were messages that were sort of, I don't want to say smuggled out, but, greetings I received from roundabout ways, that sort of thing. But otherwise, I had to really, cut my ties with this country and my friends. But then with the fall of communism, I was able to go back, and I went back for the first time in 1990. And I was at that time working for, as a freelance journalist. I was working mainly, I guess, for the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, as well as a couple other news outlets. And since I was working for JTA, I had sort of carte blanche to cover the Jewish story, not just in Poland, but in all the other post-communist countries. And it was wonderful. It was really wonderful because I wasn't writing the same stories that most other journalists had to write. I could delve into this recreation, this revival, this reclamation of identity and get into it. And it was very exciting. And at the same time, I got very interested in the Jewish built heritage. Partly it was because of my brother. My brother, Sam, who many of you know probably, in 1988 had become the founding director of the Jewish Heritage Council of the World Monuments Fund. And his job basically was to try to put together inventories of what actually was out there in Eastern Europe, because nobody knew. There weren't any inventories. Of course, there are no computer databases. There were just people like Jan Jagielski, who had an apartment filled with notebooks and 3x5 cards. And there were people in other countries like Jiří Fiedler and Arno Pajic who had apartments filled with cards and notes and all of this and maps, because they had been going out during communism, sometimes clandestinely, to try to discover these places and to document them. And since I was traveling around covering the revolutions from 89, 90, Sam asked me, he said, when you see a Jewish site, tell me about it. Take a picture, send it back, because we don't have anything. I don't have any list, nothing. And I remember the first place that I saw, when I have no idea what got me there, was the former synagogue in Kosów-Laski, not far from Warsaw, which was then apparently a flour mill. And I remember taking the picture of it and sending it back to Sam, is this. But I got very, very interested through his work and in this built heritage and what was there. Of course, you know, I knew Monika, and I knew that she had done this research back she and Staszek had done this research back in the 60s and 70s, continuing into the 80s. But I was able to really get interested in this and sort of plunged into it, and ended up that spring in the spring of 1990, making my first trip with my brother Sam and Maria and Maciej Piechotka, who were the great experts on Polish synagogues. And we traveled all around and visited, I think, about 30 synagogues, something like that. I can't remember exactly. But this really got me interested. And then I got a contract to write my first book, the Jewish Heritage Travel, the guidebook to Central and Eastern Europe. So I was all over post-communist Central Europe doing the same sort of documentation. So this is prong number one of my three-pronged interest in Jewish things Jewish in my research and writing. Jewish built heritage, putting it back on the map, filling in the blank spaces, as people used to say. Then there was the Jewish revival. And I was, as I said, I was working for JTA, so I had carte blanche to write about all of this. And I sort of really did. And I've been going back in preparation for this, this talk. I went back and read some of the things that I was writing in the 90s. And I mean, I don't remember writing a lot of them because it's a long time ago and I wrote an awful lot, but it's really fascinating reading. But it's still this case of creating something new, something that's real. They're not recreating the past. There was no way that anybody could recreate the past that had been destroyed. People were creating out of their dreams and desires. And the third prong, which also developed during the 90s, as I mentioned, is this Jewish space idea and how, in the absence of Jews, the Jewish space was being filled by non-Jews. That is, this virtually Jewish world, non-Jewish interest and interaction with, enactment of Jewish culture. Everything from this patria dell'anima, or homeland of the soul, to cosplay and commercial exploitation. I'll just throw in this picture since politics are on some of our minds right now. Hillary Clinton visited young Michael Shudrich when he was with the Lauder Foundation. She visited a Jewish community in Poland, in Warsaw, I believe, 2 times. And this was one of the things that I wrote about. I wrote about her visits. This was in 1996. And I remember there was an elderly rabbi, Yoskovich, at the time. And I remember Hillary Clinton, she either embraced him or took his hands in a way that, you know, an Orthodox elderly rabbi would not really want to be treated. But it was very, very amusing. And then this is a sukkah that was erected in Warsaw with a still very young Michael Shudrich from the 90s at sukkahs. But since what has led to chronicling, let's say, of Jewish life and the communal development is something that I dealt with more in news articles, newspaper, radio, this type of thing. But what led to my books and for my what I do now, the Jewish Heritage Europe website, was this documentation and visiting and looking for and putting back on the map physical sites. And one of the passages from Monica's book, Time of Stones, really hit me. It was a quote from a poet, and it reads, "A tribe of stones, this vast, built, ruinous, abandoned people of stones, an obstinate tribe which is ever marching and ever shouting and calling voicelessly against the background of native grasses, trees, nettles, and blackberries. Exotic Hebrew letters are still talking about those who lived here and passed away, about righteous men, just and charitable, about God-fearing and loving women who toiled for others." This is what it was. This was history speaking. These buildings to me were, and buildings and cemeteries and brick and stone, broken or abandoned, whatever, they were tangible talismans that connected us to the past, connected us to history. I sometimes looked at or regarded the Holocaust or Jewish history as a tapestry, a woven cloth or something like that, with the Holocaust in the middle, this rip, this unraveling, this big hole, but around it were the threads that we could also go back to and then sew back again, leaving the hole. I mean, it was one of these visual images that I somehow had. But I also had this intense feeling, and I think many people have this. People have it today, I think, when they travel for the first time and see these places. And this is what I wrote in my first edition of Jewish Heritage Travel, 1992. I became mesmerized and at times a little obsessed. I wanted to visit, touch, see, feel as many places as I could. I almost felt it as a duty. As I entered broken gates or climbed over broken walls into cemeteries where a Jew may not have set foot for years, I wanted to spread my arms and embrace them all, embrace all the gravestones, all the people buried there, all the memories. I'm here, I told them mentally, someone is here. And I must say, I still feel this. And I think most people who are engaged in this work feel this way to some extent. My first article my first major article in any case, about Jewish heritage sites or built heritage was in the New York Times, and it was about visiting these vestiges of Jewish Poland, the ruins. It was based on the trip that Sam and I took with the Piechotkas in the spring of 1990, when we visited all of these ruined places. And I mean, I remember some of the comments at the time. It was sort of an unheard of thing to write about, that you could visit these places. You know, the fall of the wall opened the gates to tourism, but Jews didn't want to go to Poland. It took a while for Jews to feel comfortable, and a lot of Jews still don't feel comfortable about going to Poland. It was unthinkable for some people to even write an article where you could visit these places. But for me, as I write in the article, each one was a survivor. Each one was a highly personalized memorial to the Shoah. I felt their power much more than when I went, in fact, to a death camp or a memorial, because these are all tangible. These are all person to person. I have hundreds, thousands of pictures of Jewish heritage sites that I've documented and written about. But I only want to show, I think, this one. This is the synagogue in Tykocin, when I visited for the first time in 1990 on that very same trip. And you'll see why. We'll circle back to this later in this talk. But, you know, the synagogue in Tykocin it opened as a branch of the regional museum, as a Jewish museum in the late 70s. And it was one of the very few Jewish heritage sites in all of Central and Eastern Europe, and even beyond, that were seen as attractions that tourists could go to that were of interest. I have to say that in my documentation of these sites, anger drove me a lot. I was angry that you would go to a town or a village and there would be a church and there would be a town hall, and they were written in the guidebooks or in the local histories. But there would also be a synagogue standing there, ruined perhaps, but standing there, maybe even older than the church and the town hall, but they were largely ignored. It was as if they didn't exist, as if they didn't matter, because the Jews weren't there, so nobody had to care. And this is another driving passion of mine, I guess, another driving force which kept me along this road. But in Tikochen was one of the very few places where there was an exhibit, where there was a restored synagogue. It was restored in the 70s, as I said, and you could go to see the exhibition. On one of these reporting trips, one of these documentation trips in 1992, I brought my mother along. My mother was an artist, and she created a really beautiful and impressive series of graphics, of monotype graphics, of the Jewish heritage sites that we visited in Poland, but also in Slovakia. We drove through Slovakia and also in Czech Republic, we went to some places. And this whole cycle, you can see here, the Bima in Tarnów, which at that time didn't have the roof that it has now. It was very unstable. There's the Jewish cemetery in Tarnów. You see overgrown, toppled stones, everything like that. The synagogue in Rymanów. It was one of the most powerful ruins I've ever seen. I likened it to a crouching giant animal in pain. And that's the impression it gave. It now, of course, has a new roof and it's been semi-restored, although sort of strangely. It doesn't look like this anymore. And then, of course, there was Krakow, Kazimierz, empty, except for me. That's the little figure of me with my cameras in it, and the old synagogue. But nobody in the plaza, no tourists, nothing. 1992 was just at the very beginning of the development of Kazimierz as a tourist place. My mother's graphics were shown in an exhibition at the Galicia Jewish Museum in 2005. And it was, I think it's a very nice picture of Staszek and Monika at this exhibition. We were really happy to see them displayed like that because they were displayed really beautifully. And here's Staszek and Monika again. We've remained good friends and wish we could see each other more often. The last time was in February at Tu B'Shvat at the Eitz Chaim. And we're sitting at the end of a long table, which is full of people with the rabbi at the other end. And, you know, if we look back 40 years, the changes are just, well, they're generational. What can I say? We're now the old guard. And it was wonderful to see this table full of mainly, you know, lots of young people, and also to have a non-Orthodox community and also a lively community. So it was really terrific. This is one of my favorite. I hope you can see it and that my face is not obscuring the side of the, you know, the side of the picture, the way it is on my screen. But this was Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimlet and her father, her late father, delivering a lecture together. I have to say, I can't remember. This was at the Jewish Festival in Krakow in 2008. And we're in the Kupa synagogue. The Kupa synagogue was beautifully restored in the early 2000s. When I first saw it, it was a wreck. It was a workshop, and nobody expected it to even be standing after a while. But it was restored, and they gave a lecture. And I don't know if you can see it on the side of the picture, as I said, my picture here is obscuring it, but I can't remember what the subject of this talk was. I only know that they used this famous advertisement for Levy's rye bread, American rye bread, where there's a Native American eating this rye bread. And the caption is, "You don't have to be Jewish to love Levy's rye bread." And this, in a way, was emblematic about this whole virtually Jewish thing that I had already been following for many years, of course. But it sort of sums it up. You don't have to be Jewish to love Jewish culture. You don't have to be Jewish to be involved in Jewish culture. You don't have to be Jewish to appreciate Jewish culture. You don't have to be Jewish to love Levy's rye bread. Again, I have hundreds, if not thousands of pictures, like so many people, of the Krakow Jewish Festival. And I like this picture because it shows the intensity of the crowd, you know, pressed up against the fence before the stage at the final concert on the Saturday night. And it shows some of the backdrop, the two of the Jewish style cafes, the night. I like this picture a lot, but there's so many that I could show, but I think I'll leave it at that. Talking about real, imaginary, what's up, what's not up. Schindler's List was a big impulse for people to visit Krakow, the movie. And there were Schindler's List tours. And I guess there still are Schindler's List tours. I took this tour in 1995, which is just a couple of years after the movie came out. And the guide that we had on this little van kept saying things like, you know, this was real in the movie, but this is real in real life. And he kept conflating, you know, what was cinematic and what was real and all of this. And one of the things that was shown was this road made out of matzavot that was real in the film, because it happened in real life during the war, but it was shown in the film with, of course, just concrete, just mocked up matzavot. But it was a very powerful experience to see them and walk on them, even if they weren't actually matzavot, because it evoked so much. And I think that was really powerful. And I like to juxtapose this picture with the next one, which is in the Schindler's Factory Museum, which opened in 2010, where you walk on these swastikas. You know, they're not real they're real swastikas in that they are swastikas, but they're tiles with swastikas on them. But you're meant to walk on them, and therefore you're trampling them. So it relates very, very strongly to walking on these fake matzavot, which are not supposed to be fake matzavot, because in the film they were supposed to be real. And it's a very sort of eerie, complementary experience. And this, again, I hope that this picture of mine is not, wait, I'm gonna see if I can get rid, I got rid of it. I like to juxtapose these two, because there's so many elements of the virtual Jewish world, you know, what I was talking about, everything from sincerity to commercialism to nostalgia and all of this are sort of embodied in these three pictures. On the left is a waiter at the Jewish style restaurant in Łódź, which again, I don't know if it's still existing. This was in 2005 or 2006. He's dressed as a Hasid, even with the tzitzis and the clothing. So he was mocked up into, you know, a cosplay. If he were going to a convention, he could dress up like that as a character from some Hasidic tale, if there are anime Hasidic tales or whatever. In the middle, I know that this doesn't well, it doesn't seem to exist anymore, at least the last many times I've been to Krakow, was one of the giant figures. There's all of this, kitsch and souvenirs and all of this, but this giant figure with the two little figures next to it of a Jew used to stand in front of in the plaza in front of the old synagogue and just be it was very sort of spectral appearing. And then on the right is the real Jew, is Henryk Halkowski. And I hope many of you remember Henryk. Henryk was, on the one hand, he was a writer, translator. On the other hand, he was sort of a Luftmensch who just floated around. But in a big sense, he was the conscience of Jewish Krakow. He was one of the Jews who was in Krakow, who kept sort of the idea of Jewish life, of Jewish culture alive through the communist times. And alas, sadly, he died quite young, prematurely, just over 10 years ago. I think it's coming up on 11 years. And Henryk, I love this picture of him standing with these Jewish figurines and Jewish t-shirts, because he was so dry and so pungently acerbic, talking about all of these things. He always had some little needle to say, because he didn't buy into anything. But he was quite a character, and I hope people remember him. He wrote a lot. He wrote very interesting commentaries on a lot of things. Why isn't this going? Wait a second. So when we're talking about real imaginary spaces, I guess the real imaginary spaces par excellence are the cafes, or the Jewish style cafes. And Wojtek Ornat, whom I met back in 1992, he and his wife Malgosia founded the first Jewish style cafe in Szeroka, called the Ariel. It was the white Ariel that you see in the background now. And their idea, I remember sitting there in 1992, and it was a wasteland. Kazimierz was a wasteland. And we would sit eating strawberries in these wicker tables, talking about what should happen to Kazimierz, how could it be developed, whatever. And they had opened this Ariel Cafe, and they already had their the signage was written in sort of Hebrew style letters. And some of the very few tourists who were coming, some of them, mistook it for a synagogue or something like that because of this Hebrew style letters. But it's a whole saga, which Jack Kugelmas and Anna Maria Orla-Buskowska have written about in a wonderful article called "If You Build It, They Will Come," about the saga of the Ariel and the rivalries and all of this. At this point, when this picture was taken in 1997, there were two Ariels. There was the original Ariel, which Wojtek no longer had anything to do with. And then there was the other Ariel. And then that was next door, the green Ariel. And they also left, he and Malgosia left this Ariel and moved to Klezmerhuis, where they are now. And as Jack and Anna Maria described it in their article, there was the good Ariel, which is what Wojtek and Malgosia ran. And then there was the bad Ariel, because the bad Ariel was considered to be very commercial, and still is. And the Ornat's Ariel was where the Jews went. During the Jewish Culture Festival, it's where the Jewish performers and Jewish personalities would hang out. And then they went to Klezmerhuis. And because this Ariel, the green Ariel, went through another incarnation as the Aleph, and then the Aleph eventually left, and the white Ariel took over. It's all a big story of personal conflicts and rent and all of this. And I frankly don't know all the details, but there was this period where there was the good Ariel and the bad Ariel. And the thing, whatever was good or bad, the fact is that Wojtek and Małgosia with their Ariel, they really set the template for the Jewish style cafe and how it's decorated, what food is served, and all of this. This is Klezmerhuis as it is more or less today. And some of the things that you can see, which are used, are lace tablecloths, old pictures on the wall. There are sort of conventions now about what a Jewish cafe should look like. And I remember really sitting there thinking, it was sort of an homage to the past. I've read descriptions of Jewish cafes before the war, and they really didn't look like this. But this was sort of to create this real imaginary space, which would draw people and make people feel comfortable, make people like to be there, make people enjoy. But also, I think the Ornats, they have also now run a very good Jewish publishing house, and they had organized concerts and all of this. Unfortunately, the COVID has curtailed the activity, but I hope that it'll be up and running at some point again. Their model served as a model for Jewish style cafes elsewhere. The one that was always this oddest to me, I don't know if odd is not the right word, maybe really using sort of imagery, is the Anatevka, where I already showed that waiter dressed like a Hasid. Anatevka, of course, is the town where the fiddler on the roof lived. And so the main decoration in the main dining room in Anatevka, and again, I don't know if it's still like this was a while ago, there was a young fiddler next to a roof sitting on a platform. And when you sat down, you were given your, matzah, basically. And you were also given a little figurine, a little Jewish figurine, one of these, lucky Jews that are so written about and controversial and all of that. It was a very sort of, there's this claim of homage, but there's also this use of stereotype and commercialism, and cosplay. And so in Kiev, there was Tsimis. In Lviv, you've got this controversial at the Golden Rose, where for the waitresses would come, they would make you sort of haggle for what price you would pay, and they had hats you could put on with payas connected to it. And then there was this one in Lublin, I think it was called Mandragora. So there was this model. And of course, there's several of these cafes in Krakow still, even though on Shiroka, I think there's an Indian restaurant, there's a very international restaurant, there's I think Italian restaurant. So the Jewish style restaurants are pretty much, I think, a minority there now. But one of the ones that is makes this sort of real and imaginary connection explicit is this one, Once Upon a Time in Kazimierz, which is at the end of here, where it's highlighted in yellow. You can see they put together, there's this sort of fake row of stores, which I'll show you in the next picture, with names of Novak, Holzer, Katz, Weinberg, et cetera, et cetera. And it says the interiors of these business premises, be they little grocery stores or dimly lit workshops, are fitted out exactly as they used to be, exactly as they used to be. Now they are separated from each other only by imaginary partition walls, as the real ones have long been pulled down, turning the adjacent premises into a single cozy and inviting space, symbolizing integration between two peoples and their religions and culture. So I think in a way that sums up one of the ways you can look at real imaginary very explicitly. And here's what it looks like. Here's this row on top. You see these, one is a fashion, one is the, I forget what these are, Holzer. They're supposed to be little shops. And there's Chaim Cohen at the end. And that sign that I showed is hanging on the wall where this arrow is. It hangs on the wall there, so you can read about it. And inside, it's, you know, another Jewish style cafe with lacy tablecloths and old-fashioned chairs and clothing and other old-fashioned things hanging that fulfill this model that were a variation of the model that Wojtek created. Some years back, I went around to a lot of these. I tried to hit I was doing an article about Jewish cafes in Krakow. In fact, I think I was doing it for the Jewish Museum in Berlin, a publication that they were coming out with. And I went with my friend Steve Weintraub, who is a Yiddish dancer and dance teacher who would take part in the Jewish Culture Festival. And we went around to all these cafes, including the so-called Bad Ariel, which is still very highly commercial. And, you know, people will sit and take pictures of it as if it's an attraction in itself. And I've seen tour groups go in for 2 minutes and then come out because they're seeing this as one of the things you see when you're in Krakow. And Steve, I mean, he really set himself up. We set up these pictures where he stood next to the real Jew, stood next to these sort of modern old-fashioned paintings, theoretically, of Jews next to the lacy tablecloths and all that. And also in the Ariel, there's lots of these Jewish figurines of musicians and paintings of Jews and all of this. And Steve again posed a few years later for at one of the parts of, there was a big exhibition about these Jewish figurines that Erica Lehrer curated. And I love it the way he stood and put his own Jewish face in this row of carved wooden figurines. I just want to say a word about the virtual Jews, to whom I owe so much. They were my guides, my friends, and here just a few people. I mean, from Janusz Makuch at the Jewish Culture Festival to Jan Jagielski, Tomasz Wiśniewski in Białystok, Tomek Kuncewicz in Oświęcim, in Będzin, and then Arno Pazik in Prague. They were and then of course, since 1998, Michael Trayson has been overseeing this awards given each year to non-Jewish Poles who work to protect, preserve, and promote Jewish cultural heritage. And it's very important. It's one of the most important moments, I think, at the Jewish Culture Festival. I want to now turn all these people who are very deeply and seriously and intensively and lovingly involved in Jewish culture have what my friend Luigi Grechi, who's an Italian country singer, what he calls they found their patria dell'anima, their homeland of the soul. And Luigi is also someone, I've discussed this a lot with him, this idea of homeland of the soul. When I first met him, again, it was in 2005, when I was already doing research on this imaginary Wild West. I asked him, how will I recognize you when we meet up? And he said, I'll be the one who looks like Buffalo Bill. But we've discussed this idea of patria dell'anima very much, because some people are so connected that that's where they feel at home. And he's an Italian. I mean, he's not an American, but he feels deeply at home and deeply immersed in American music and country music. He tried bring it to Italy in the 80s. And he's written a song, a wonderful song, sort of, you know, poking fun at his efforts and, you know, sitting and singing about railways to people who didn't really care. But the person whom I know best in Poland in this world is this man who goes by the stage name Michael Lone Star. And it turns out, I mean, I thought that we met in 2005 at the Dobro Fest, which was a country music festival in Trnava, Slovakia, where he's in this is where he is in this picture. But as we were talking, he asked me, he said, did you live in Poland before? And I said, yeah, but you know, like 25 years ago. He said, we met. And he remembers meeting me in 1982, not long before I was expelled from Poland, just around Christmas 1982. And I was expelled from Poland in January, a couple of weeks later. And he remembers meeting me at a Christmas party at some American diplomat's house. And I have to say, I do not remember meeting him then, but he remembers meeting me because we were talking about country music at this party. He said, we were talking about Asleep at the Wheel. Asleep at the Wheel is an American country group that has won something like 9 Grammys. And its leader, Ray Benson, is an old friend of mine. I know him since we were teenagers. And so Lone Star remembered meeting me back then. And but I consider really that we met in 2005 in Trnava. And I've met him on many occasions. And it was he who has described so eloquently this feeling of how the attraction to and this involvement in country music and this American style during the communist era was so important as a sort of political act. Just the way people I have talked to who have told me, you know, every time we found an abandoned synagogue or Jewish cemetery, abandoned and overgrown, and documented it, we felt we were striking a blow against the regime. Lone Star told me the same thing. He said, every time I put on my cowboy hat and boots, I was giving the finger to the regime. And this is how this I can't even call it activism, but it was this identity, formation of identity and interest that that sort of links these two, in a way, these two fields, these two, you know, virtual worlds sort of thing. And somehow there's this connection, even though there's so many things that are different. But I met him in Trnava. It was actually through Luigi, because we were traveling sort of together, following his friend, who's a very well-known American country artist, folk artist named Peter Rowan. And Peter Rowan was playing on tour with a Czech band, a Czech bluegrass band called Druhá Tráva, which has become basically my favorite band. And Luigi and I were traveling around with them going to concerts. In this little picture, you can see Luigi, because the Druhá Tráva gave a concert in the great synagogue in Pilsen in Czech Republic. But let me go back to Lone Star for a minute, because I was telling you how this, you know, creating this real imaginary feeling. One of his best known songs is called Radio, and he sings both in Polish and in English. Besides being a singer, he's an interpreter, and he interprets from Polish to English and to Italian. And in this song, he puts himself into the persona of an American truck driver. This song was written just after martial law came in. And what he's saying is this creation of identity, this homeland of the soul, which is what he's found. I've run this country coast to coast. I know its highways better than my home. Willie Nelson's lyrics, he says, go straight to his own heart. Easy words, easy tunes, and yet my heart is going. Such an easy rhyming, yet teardrops start to roll. I think that Willie knew me and all my story. I only wonder how come he knows me at all. How does, Willie Nelson, he finds this affinity with Willie Nelson and his songs. And he feels, as I said, it was just after martial law crushed Solidarność and crushed a lot of this euphoria or openness that had come up under Solidarność. But as I said, we were traveling, Luigi and I were traveling to follow Juhatrava and Peter Rowan. And this is another thing that I like about this group, and like Lone Star, they take this American archetype of music and make it their own. I mean, it's really a, it's not sort of copycat. Some of it is copycat. So some of it is copycat, some of it is surface. But some of the best people who were involved in this have really found some home in this real imaginary world. I've seen Lone Star a lot in Poland and even outside of Poland. He, in 1982, was one of the founders of the Country Picnic, which is a big country music festival that still sort of goes on. And I saw him there in 2006. And you can see, some of the paraphernalia. People wear cowboy hats, they dress up, they have American and Confederate flags that they wave all the time. And there is this sort of, again, it's a real imaginary space because these are all Polish people and they're all digging on in this whole sort of American or like strangely American, stereotype American way of life, but way of expression. And so he was there at the picnic in 2006. And here's some of the other people at the picnic. And it all, there was a big area where things were for sale and lots of gadgets and lots of stuff. But I think it's the only, I've been to a lot of country music festivals in Europe, but Rangovo was the only one where I've ever seen pictures of Jews for sale along with pictures of frontiersmen and Pilsudski, of course. But this really caught my eye, and it really shows how this Jewish space was sort of all over. This was again in 2006. And in fact, I went to Rangovo when I took a break from documenting an updated edition of my Jewish Heritage travel book to go to the Country Western Festival. Also at the Country Picnic is the first time I ran into this man who went by the name of Long Bob. He was one of these people who just, who just was a character. He always turned up in that costume. And he had this tiny little violin that he played like this. And then he was always with his son. His son is the man with the sheriff's badge in the foreground, whose name is Luciano or Lucian. And they were inseparable, and they went to all sorts of country music festivals and danced and were characters there. This is again at the picnic in 2006. But I also ran into them at the country festival in Ustron, where I was in 2007 and 2009, which also had this. And again, it's a form of cosplay, but it's also for some people becomes a way of life. And I've talked to people in this, just as I've talked to people who are involved in the Jewish, non-Jews who are involved in the Jewish world, who find their whole interest in their whole life and their whole sort of motivations there. I've talked to people in this country world who it's almost like talking to someone who's transgender somehow. There's a guy I met in Germany, and he feels like he's a Texan. He feels like he was born in the wrong body. He shouldn't be in the German body. He should be in a Texan body. And it's very interesting because it's more than cosplay, it's more than play. For some people, it is just play, but there is this sort of, as I said, this homeland of the soul, which you get in this milieu and you get in the virtually Jewish one. So I saw also Long Bob in Berlin, the Berlin Country Music Messe. Country Music Messes was this big fan and trade fair, which was held every year in Berlin, where bands came. There were four different stages for bands to play. Lone Star would go there every year, and bands would come and booking agents would come to hear them and all of this, and to book them. So just as these, the Jewish cafes, Jewish style cafes were sort of the quintessential real imaginary Jewish space, these Wild West theme parks and restaurants and saloons play that role in the imaginary Wild West. And just as in the Jewish world, they can be deeply intimate. Like this one, it's called Beaver City in the Czech Republic. And it was created by people who, they call themselves hobbyists, but they want to go there and live like, I think Beaver City was supposed to be in Wyoming in 1865. And when I first went there, you had to don a sort of, era appropriate costume before they would let you in. And they go there and just sort of hang out. And on the other end are commercial chains like this one. This is on the Rynek in Krakow, Su, which is a chain that has outlets in other parts of Poland. And I remember the first time I heard about Su was when I was sitting, I think, at Klezmerhuis during the Krakow Jewish Festival, and Lawrence Glamberg from the Klezmatics came running up to me. He said, "You've got to see this, you've got to see this." And he unrolled the menu of Su. And it was the irony of sort of sitting in this Jewish style cafe, looking at a menu for a Western style restaurant like that was not lost, let's say that. But, speaking of intimate places, within an easy walk from Kazimierz in Krakow, Long Bob and his son ran this saloon. Now, I have no idea. I doubt if it still exists. Long Bob died last year at the age of 93, and I have no idea what happened to his son. But once when I was at the Jewish Culture Festival in Krakow, I just walked there. I just took a walk, and it was, 20 minutes or so, and I got to Luciano's Western Saloon, and Long Bob was there. And inside was, if the decorations in Jewish style cafes sort of look similar, the decorations in Wild West restaurants and saloons look similar. This was all done by themselves. It was sort of a shrine to their anima, to their soul, to their connection, the shrine to the country singers, all of this America. And it was very, it was intimate. What can I say? Intimate, and it was made by these two guys. Poland also has commercial theme park, Wild West theme park now, called Twin Pigs, where I visited a couple of years ago, and it's very commercial. It has it would be like the bad Ariel, the most commercial of the Jewish style places that you can imagine, the most stereotypical. But it was fun. I must say, it was full of families out doing things, going to the saloon and whatever. And now I'm just ending up, and I want to end up back with Chuck Fishman, because a couple of years ago, he had his exhibition opened at the Zich in Warsaw. And I went, of course, And I also invited my friend Michael Lone Star, the country singer, to come. And he did. But what did he bring me? I mean, this circles all the way back. Remember, this is a guy whom I apparently met, but don't remember, in 1982, when he was already involved in the country music scene and was founding the Marangova Picnic, whom I re-met when I was looking at all of this country stuff. But what did he bring me? He brought me a rarity. He brought me a drawing of the synagogue of Tykocin that was one of the first synagogues in Poland that I visited and documented. He did this drawing in 1968, when he was an architecture student, and the students went out to draw, make drawings of interesting buildings. And he did this drawing of the interior of the synagogue in Tykocin when it was basically still a ruin. And it's a rarity. And you look at this, compare his rendition of the Ark here with this picture that my brother took in 1990 of the Ark. I mean, it's of the restored synagogue. I mean, it's all circles back, and all of this to me seems connected. I don't know if anybody else or any of you out there listening feel it's connected, but I feel it's connected. And I'll end there. This is the link to Jewish Heritage Europe. If anybody's interested, I can share the screen and show you the website and how it works, if anybody wants to hang on or can hang on. And the books that I've written, some of them are still available, some of them are not, but Jewish Heritage Travel is still available, Virtually Jewish is still available. And I'm beginning to put the PDFs of the chapters of Upon the Doorposts of Thy House, which includes a long chapter about what to do with Kazimierz, which I wrote like in 93, 94, right at the beginning of the development of Kazimierz. So this will be able to, you will be able to find this online on my, I don't know, academia or my website or something like that. Anyway, thank you very much. I hope people are still there. And
thank you, Ruth. Yeah, people are still there, and people are probably, as I am, quite amazed with what you showed us. I didn't expect that it go this way, but it's even better.
I know you didn't. I didn't expect it.
And it will give me some. Yeah. It will. I would think about that. I need to digest this this content. Okay. Someone just said that on the chat, if we are aware about the Helm synagogue situation, which is now a salon-themed pizza restaurant.
It was when I was at Helm. It was I should have put this in. I should have put this picture in because I have the picture of it. When I went there, it was like it was two things. It was a Western style saloon. I think it was called Mackenzie Saloon on the ground floor, and then upstairs was sort of an upscale restaurant. What's interesting about that synagogue, though, is that on the side of it, it has a plaque that identifies it as a former synagogue and tells a bit of its history. So at least there's that. I mean, I'm a big proponent of signage, and not every single synagogue needs to be saved, but I think every synagogue needs to be marked. If it's turned into something else, you got to say what it used to be. I think I'll be discussing this type of thing, signage and everything like that. At a discussion during the ECJC summit with Helise Lieberman and Victor Sorensen and Michael Mayle. We'll be talking about what to do with places and what to be done with them. So yes, I know about Helm. I just forgot to put it in.
There's like some more questions, I think. Today there is a discussion about appropriation or misappropriation of people's culture by others. What do you think about this?
Well, I think a lot of different things about it. I think that, you know, it goes back I think a lot of cultures are melded. A lot of, you know, like country music melds African-American culture and, you know, Irish American culture. The banjo came from Africa and became Appalachian. I think, I like fusion, frankly. You can talk about appropriation or misappropriation. There can be misappropriation and appropriation, but there can also be positive fusion and positive mutual influence. And, you know, it goes back, can a white person sing the blues? Yes, I think a white person can sing the blues, and sometimes I sing it very well. I think Janis Joplin was terrific. I think there are a lot of blues singers. The Beastie Boys sing rap. Is that appropriation, or is it modulation, or is it fusion, or is it just appreciation? So it's a very multifaceted and multi-stranded discussion. So we can discuss it not when there are other questions. I mean, I think I have a complex reaction to that.
I understand.
And
there's one interesting question about this article about how Kazimierz should develop. The question is, what did happen from your recommendation? What didn't happen?
Oh, well, what happened was that, I'm going to look at the chat. Shall I look at the chat too?
Yeah. That will be helpful. Thanks.
There was this Kazimierz action plan came out. I forget what year it came out. There was a lot going on. I have all of the books, and I have articles. There were conferences like in the early 90s. You know, the International Center that's on the Rinneck sponsored some conferences. And then there was this Kazimierz action plan that laid out some ideas based on developments in some other cities. I think Edinburgh was one of them. I forget the other. And what seemed to happen, if I remember, was that, you know, as happens very often, individual entrepreneurs and individual actors sort of, you know, leaped over these plans that had not been put into operation. So it became sort of an organic development. I used to compare, I mean, you know, a lot of what I'm talking about dates back to these early days, the 90s, when there were different things going on in different places. But it's interesting to note that when I was researching Virtually Jewish, Poland was not a main, I mean, I had written about Poland. I had written first about filling the Jewish space in a report, like a monograph that I wrote in 1996 for the American Jewish Committee. And I dealt with Poland, Czech Republic, and Germany in this. In Virtually Jewish, Poland is only one part of many countries, or several countries that I deal. I deal with things that are going on in Germany, in Italy, in Czech Republic, Poland, and even Austria, I think. And I used to compare, you know, the development of tourism and the Jewish aspect, tourism, in Prague and in Krakow. I mean, Krakow was hard to get to. It was not on main rail lines or whatever. There wasn't a highway from other places. And I'm not sure that there still is, if there is now, a 4-lane highway from many places. But so it wasn't really that easy to get to. So things were developing in a more organic and slow way, one thing after another. I remember every time I would go back to Krakow, there'd be another cafe, another restaurant, another this. What happened in Prague was almost overnight, where people just flowed in. And the Jewish quarter in Prague reacted to the mass tourism by creating a sort of mass touristic response. Which still is like that. I mean, several years ago, 4 summers ago, I led a tour that went from Warsaw, Khmelnyk, Krakow, Boskovice, Prague. And we had local guides, because you need to have local guides. I was like the cultural guide. You need to have local licensed guides taking people around. And I mean, I must say that the least sensitive guides that we had, the ones who were just doing it as a job, was the one in Prague, because it was a job. There were so many tourists, and the Jewish sites were on, you know, must see, you have to do this, you have to do that. And it was very, I don't want to use the word sensitive, but very sort of, you know, cold in a way. In Krakow, we had a terrific guide. I think we had someone from Galicia Jewish Museum, I can't remember, but taking time and explaining and talking, and also in Boskovice, also in Khmelnyk, and also in Warsaw. But there was this sense in Prague that, you know, tourist or tourist, and this is what you see, this is what you do. Now, I know in Krakow, the mass tourism has created this type of guide also, but it's still possible to find this sort of interest and this sensitivity and this, you know, softness, I would say, in a guide that you won't find, or at least we didn't find in Prague. What else? Let's see.
It's a question about one particular photograph from Kiev or Lviv.
Oh yeah, that was Kiev. I think, yeah, I think in Kiev it does have coins. And what I found interesting in Kiev, again, this is, you know, a while ago, so things may be different, was that people didn't seem to mind it. It was all new, and it was, I think the restaurant also was run by Jews, if I remember correctly. So it was, you know, it was sort of taking this model and, you know, blowing it up. I have pictures from inside that restaurant somewhere too, which show more of these carved figures and all of that.
There's one question. Let's make it the last question. There's a question from Alana. Do you think there is a significant number of the virtual Jewish culture members who came from the Jewish stock? Ancestry that converted or were hidden?
I mean, I think there's some. I think there's some, but there are a lot who are not. And there are a couple of these people, and when I see them, I always say, you know, when are you going to convert? When are you going to convert? And they say, no, we're not. I know, you know, it's you don't have to be Jewish. I think some people do. I mean, some people get involved, and their involvement also entails them finding out that they have these roots. That's happened to a number of people. But other people get involved because, you know, there's a whole other myriad reasons why people get involved. And again, you know, the level of involvement is, there are various levels of involvement. You can be involved by going to a concert, or you can be involved by doing your PhD. And I know someone, you know, who's done both his master's and his PhD. He's not Polish, he's another nationality. He's done both his master's and his PhD on Jewish subject, and he will be doing a PhD on Jewish subjects, and he's immersed in this culture, and he's been so since he was a little boy, but he's not Jewish at all. He has nothing Jewish in his ancestry. But yes, I think some people are, and some, as I said, I think some people then find that they have this connection. You know, feel that that may be what this sort of unrecognized, what I think Katka Reshka calls hunch about Jewishness, is what drew them to it. but it's not necessarily true.
So to connect Jews and Wild West, you don't have to be Jewish to like the bread, Levi. What you said before.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's it for today. You can send us questions. There will be an email communication after this webinar, this lecture. So if you have any additional questions, I will pass them to Ruth. As Ruth said, she's happy to communicate with you guys later on outside this format, outside this meeting. Thank you everyone for joining us. The next event will be taking place in around a month, maybe even in less than a month, at the beginning of December. We will be posting information about that with our channels. Thank you again, Ruth. Thank you for your amazing lecture. Thank you for sharing all those photographs. Thank you for allowing the camera to be smuggled to the prison and to this historic photograph of the Solidarity leaders to be taken. I never knew that. Thank you.
Let me ask you a question. Will I be able to see the chat after we end this session?
You will be able to see the chat. Yeah, this is. I will send you the sort of a document with a chat, so you will be able to see.
Just because I didn't have a chance to read, but there seem to be a lot of them. So anyway.
Thank you, guys. See you next time. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks a lot, everybody.
And Ruth, you have to just finish the. As a host, you have to finish this. Yeah.
I have to end.
Bye, bye, guys. Thank you. Bye, bye.
Bye. Thanks a lot. Bye.